We're turning our attention to the Project Big Picture, and this is a story that has emerged over the last 36 hours, maybe even 24 hours or so, about the future of English football. It is essentially a battle for the soul of English football. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent joins us now. Good morning to you, Miguel. How are you doing?
Morning, not too bad.
There's quite a lot at stake here. In some ways, not that much is at stake, I guess, for your common football fan sitting at home watching on TV. But actually, there is quite a lot at stake here, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, first of all, and why this plan has proven attractive to the EFL is because it's essentially about the immediate future and long-term future of a score of clubs. I mean, a lot of these clubs, the way English football was going, a lot of these clubs were already in danger. I think in the Independent we did a piece last year about how within 5 years, 2/3 of the 72 could be gone just because of the way football's finances were headed, the difficulty they had in making ends meet. So, I mean, on the one side, what's at stake is their existence, which is why this bailout has been so attractive. But it's a bailout with an awful lot of strings, and the strings really and caveats really outweigh the bailout in terms of kind of the future. And that's, I mean, you talk about what's at stake. Beyond their existence, it's also the future power of English football and the very structure of English football, as well as what the Premier League will look at. Because this is, I mean, we were on a Zoom press conference with Rick Parry, who's one of the architects of the plan and the head of the EFL, before England, Belgium at Wembley on Sunday. And it was even directly put to him, this is basically just Project Power Grab, which he, of course, rejected. But when you see the number of terms and number of conditions that are attached to this, it's hard to see it any other way, because it really, I think the absolute key is, beyond all the changes to the Premier League, reducing it to 18, but it would be that essentially a vote of 6 clubs would be enough to affect any future decision in the Premier League. That's what it comes down to.
So just for anybody who's kind of coming late to the story, and especially in this part of the world, we've been obsessing about getting knocked out of the Euros and the COVID positives, non-positive, positive that's happened over the last 24 hours. Essentially, under the cover of COVID, the Premier League have offered a bailout to the English league clubs of about 250 million and a guarantee of 25% of their future revenues, on the understanding that the power dynamic shifts to a point where 9 clubs will have votes in the Premier League to dictate essentially all football policy, although there are some things that would still be voted, and of that you don't need more than 6 to make a majority decision. That's the bones of it?
That's pretty much it, yeah. And it's fun, funny enough, it's 6 when over the last few years, the big sixes, as they've been called, have been basically operating as a power block, often been frustrated they can't get things through with that, one of the most contentious issues there being TV rights and distribution of money. And they recently or in the last 2 years, got a stop where more of the international revenue from TV rights goes to them. So yeah, that is what it comes down to, and again, that's the core of this, because whatever about all the rest of it, once you hand over the political, that's all leverage is with them, and it really is why it feels, even though there is actually a lot of merit within the plan and things that need to be done, but it's just totally outweighed by the conditions.
The stuff that needs to be done is giving the league clubs some access to the massive amounts of money that slush around the Premier League system, to give them a lifeline so that they continue to exist and we still have a League One and a Championship and a League Two, because that's how English football has always been, and those clubs are important local facilities and amenities.
Yeah, exactly. And even, I'd obviously be no defender of the Conservative government in this country, but say in some of the negotiations that have been taking place about, going right back to Project Restart and all the conditionality about coming back there, and one of the fair questions is, well, it shouldn't I just mentioned it there about TV rights. That's what this is all about, really. I mean, it starts and ends with TV rights and the inequality that produces. That is the cause of most of this. Basically, I mean, as we've seen with the rising broadcast contracts. Although, interestingly, within the plan, there's talk about how they expect broadcast rights to go up by 10% in the next round of negotiations, and that will help pay for a lot of the bailout, which is obviously key to getting the other side on board here. But as you talk to anyone in the game now, and especially, I mean, you only have to look at the wider situation. It feels wildly optimistic to get a 10% rise in broadcast rights, given everything going on at the moment. But basically, it has been the huge money from TV and what that has done to both the Premier League, the creation of a top six or a big six, and the stretch that's caused in English football. That is the primary reason for all of these issues. And that's what you have to get at. And that's what requires the only solution to English football's problems is really the redistribution of that money. I mean, I was talking to the chairman of one EFL club just the other day. Like he did put it in very kind of succinct terms and explain the problem. You know, obviously part of this is about preserving the English football pyramid. That's been such a huge discussion and all this, and the merits of the pyramid and the social value of clubs and all that. But as he put it, the strength of the pyramid is also its weakness, which is linked to relegation. So if you have all this money washing in at the very top end, that stays at the very top end, and it means to actually get into the Premier League is such a massive prize that it can potentially change the future of clubs. What it does is create a vortex that goes right down the league. And no matter how responsible some clubs will try and be, it just once that upward drag exists, it's going to create this ladder, these huge gaps. People will jump across, and that's what's happened. It's created almost this race, and also it's in a world. Let's not forget. I mean, this is the cycle that British football has been locked in, basically, and it's why the Big Six has been created. The more money they get, obviously, the better players they can buy, the more attractive they are, the more money they get. And what that has done is actually, I did a piece in this last year, and it's again why so many of the 72 are under threat. What that has done is basically, it's not just consumed money and interest, but it started to concentrate fans as well. So that so many of these kind of local clubs in the EFL, the old kind of, as was put to me, the dad son, if you want to be sexist about it, but the dad son kind of handing down tickets legacy is starting to be broken, and it's ultimately why so many of these clubs, their traditional support is maybe beginning to get eroded, despite their huge community value. And again, this plan will just fortify more of that. It hands more power and more, it gives the Big Six the chance to just really consolidate their strength, become more attractive, and further pull away. And I think that's the major problem with the plan as well, is whatever about the good it does in stabilising English football financially at a time of, unprecedented volatility, it doesn't just stabilise, it puts it in stasis. It basically freezes the power structures as they are. And that's also one of the remarkable things. I mean, when you even think about it in those terms, because it's only years ago where John Henry, the owner of Liverpool and one of the architects of this plan, he was complaining about, there's only 4 clubs who are internationally attractive from the Premier League. It needs to be better than that. Well, in that time, it's grown to 6. And my point being just there, it just feels it's illogical and misguided to just try and freeze the power structure at any point in time. And because of the details of this plan, that's exactly what it would do.
Miguel, do you think that a Big Six has been so formed at this point that it is essentially getting freezed anyway, that regardless of an actual plan, that the Big Six are getting bigger, that they are pulling away from the pack even more than they have done at any point, that this plan is maybe a better deal for the EFL to the ultimate consequence, which is the Big Six getting bigger and beyond being chased down?
Well, I mean, obviously, that's where I do have a lot of sympathy for the EFL and Rick Parry, who's head of the EFL and has been one of the architects of this as well. And I think it's also why there is some logic in the plan. In that, I mean, I did a huge piece in this myself back in February about. I mean, inequality is now arguably hardwired into football. We've had 40 years of every single decision in football has been going one way. I mean, there's even an argument that's put it's embraced a mode of hypercapitalism to a greater degree, the industry in the world, including international banking, because it doesn't have the same level of intervention. And what that has done has created, not just in England, but basically a group of about 10 to 11 super clubs, obviously with the likes of Bayern Munich and Juventus in there, or PSG, who are regularly winning the league and winning a greater proportion of their games than ever before, which again is just propagating this problem of them being more attractive and generating more income than 99.9% of the game. And I think the way football is moving, there is an argument that inequality is actually unsolvable. And it's why when the story came out on Sunday through a brilliant scoop by Sam Wallace in the Telegraph, and he followed that up with an interview with Parry, within that, or within one particular comment from Parry, there was the logic, which is basically that this is the situation as is. If it continues, clubs that have a real social value will go bust. And we're talking about, tens of clubs, possibly, 30, 40 out of 72. This saves them. And so it really comes down to the question of whether you think football's inequality is unsolvable or not. I wouldn't go so far. I think there are still measures that can be taken, but it just takes hard action. It takes leadership in football. It takes pushback. I mean, again, to go back, one of the major issues is the redistribution of TV money. But I suppose, I wrote this in my own piece this morning, but the big clubs aren't going to introduce a version of Das Kapital to football anytime soon. And if you accept that, then yes, this probably is the best solution. But, it's been talked, some of the terminology has been used about this. It's been talked about as the biggest revolution in the game since 1992. It's not a revolution at all. It's just an evolution of the steps that were taken in 1992. It's just the next step in that big Premier League plan, and the same debates that were thrown out around then about what the Premier League would become are happening now. And I mean, and it really comes down to this. I don't think the answer to inequality is to institutionalize the inequality, and that's exactly what this does.
It is actually the logical endpoint of that, where the people who are making the most money become the ones who are the power brokers, because that's the system that they all signed up to when they started the Premier League. The one counter-argument about the Premier League is that, is it 46 clubs have been in the Premier League since it started, that actually relegation has been...
49, so 43 have been up and down, and 6 have been in it since the very start. Right,
so that, it has actually been relatively, I would say, it hasn't been competitive in that, they all had a chance of winning it, but there has been a bigger spread of winners than maybe we might have feared in the early noughties, when it looked like it was just going to be a Manchester United and Arsenal preserve at that stage. So what actually happens next? It looks like there's a consensus growing that it'll be voted down, but if it gets voted down, will they still hand over the 250 million bailout and save football, or is this, does the brinkmanship ultimately lead to some form of this being agreed?
Well, that's where it's interesting, because one of the criticisms of this plan has been that it's just exploitation. It's trying to take advantage of the EFL and football at a particularly weak moment. Whereas the spin or the counter argument to that has been, well, actually, these plans have been formulated for the last 3 years, so it really predates the COVID crisis. So if it is voted down, which seems, I mean, literally at Wembley on Sunday, as I was hearing from people, that this is already dead in the water because enough aren't going to go to it. And as you say, it needs a vote of 14 in the Premier League, and there's about at least 11 clubs in the Premier League, possibly more, who, I mean, this is the big problem for the Big Six in that way, in that essentially it just writes off the rest of the 14 in the Premier League as part of the rest of it. And it was actually, as was put to me by someone involved in the discussions the other day, and this is what the rest of the Premier League really doesn't want to hear, that really you could take the Big Six, and as you say there about how there's been another 43 clubs in the Premier League, you could basically take any 14 from the EFL, put them with the Big Six, and the product would probably be largely the same. Again, many clubs would dismiss that. The likes of Everton, and Everton, of course, are actually one of the 6 to have been in the Premier League since its 1992 inception, whereas Manchester City haven't. But that is probably the reality. Those 6 clubs are of a certain size that they, attract so much interest that is true. But that's also why this won't get through, because it's essentially alienated the other 14. And to be fair, there's also from the kind of murmurs going around, I don't think the Big Six is completely unified on this either. From what we heard, Spurs are one of the more enthusiastic about it. Arsenal aren't sure. Manchester City are kind of willing to kind of toe the Premier League line. But then, as you say, discussions go on if this gets voted down. But something else that was put to me in all this was basically that this obviously isn't the plan in its final form. This is a negotiating position, and it's interesting actually that within the plan, say, some of the ideas are to reduce the Premier League to create more space for European competition, which is very much because the Juventus owner Andrea Agnelli has these big ideas for expanding the Champions League as well for 2024-25. Now in Europe, it's seen these models are often called Agnelli plans, and that put out the most extreme example possible. So you reposition the debate and set it at a point where you can, where you'll get more than you expected through. And it has been put around from a United or Liverpool perspective. Maybe this is a bit of a Agnelli negotiation in that they're putting them out the most extreme version out, with that represented by the voting rights, in the hope of getting more of what they want through, which is, of course, more space for games, for European games, more space for kind of lucrative foreign tours, even if that seems a bit fanciful with the current situation. But yeah, that's what's this current plan might be dead in the water, and this is draft 18 of Project Big Picture. But the discussions around this aren't going to go away, and of course you have the ongoing problem of the EFL needs a bailout, especially given that fans it doesn't look like they're coming back anytime soon.
Yeah, and so the European Super League, there's a bit of bait and switch going on with some of this, like ultimately reducing the Premier League from 20 to 18. If they get that much, and they still have to have their voting blocks and still have to try and get the Villas of the world and the Leeds of the world to go along with their ideas, ultimately if they get a little bit of their plan, they'll be happy enough, right?
Yeah, exactly. And again, as we keep coming back to in this argument, or in this discussion, sorry, it just perpetuates the problem. Every single step, even if they don't get the full plan they want now, even the minor concessions, but it just increases the way football is going, which is that the super clubs just create more space for them to accumulate more of football's capital, more of football's kind of mental space that they dominated to such a degree. And because there are some real tangents you can go down with this. If you say the example of Juventus, their current jersey doesn't have the proper Juventus stripes, and that's because that's seen as unattractive in the US market. And this is what is becoming a genuine issue in football, and that it's just the amount of the global commercial space that this small group of clubs are accumulating, and it's beginning to cause real problems in the games. And it's also why it's interesting, actually, that so far the 2020-21 season, maybe as a consequence of COVID and everything that's happening, but it's been so wild, and we've had such unpredictable results because that has been so out of kilter with the way football has been going for at least a decade now, because every single mechanism in place is just making a group of clubs so much wealthier than everyone else that the only competition is really between them.
I didn't know that about the Juve jersey. I've just looked it up there. It's kind of grim, isn't
it? Miguel, just on that Juve jersey point, is that almost as big a threat as this for the non-top clubs in the Premier League? That there will be this sort of joined-up thinking between Juventus and Liverpool and Real Madrid, Barcelona, and this idea of a European Super League just takes on so many legs, where this 18-team Premier League becomes a 16-team Premier League after everybody sees how sensational the European Super League is, and this is eventually just a dwindling away of the domestic product.
Well, that's exactly it, yeah. And you already see it in kind of just the size the Champions League will become, and it's almost the great seduction of the Champions League. I mean, because the Champions League actually causes the same sort of problem as the TV money in England, in that it generates so much cash that and it's redistributed so unevenly that it makes football lopsided in that way. And as an example of one of the problems there, I remember talking to someone in the who's again involved in these negotiations who represents a number of leagues. And for the last discussions about how European competition prize money will be redistributed. So obviously, this is all the money that the Europa League and Champions League generates, and they call it solidarity money. The amount of money that goes to non-competing clubs to try and redress the balance between those that compete in the Champions League, whatever. So as we all know, basically, if say like Spurs, for example, when they got to the final 2 years ago or last year, they got 100 million. So one of the things UEFA want to do, and obviously many more interested parties in European competition want to do, is make that money, or make the redistribution of that money more equitable, so we don't have these gaps in football. Now, the European leagues, who represent all the various the domestic leagues in Europe, the 53 of them, they wanted to increase that solidarity money to 20% at the last negotiations. What actually happened, because of the pressure of the super clubs, was the figure of 8.5, I think it was, went down to 7.3. I might not have those exact. That's pretty much it. It was either 8.3, 7.5, or the other way around. And this is when we're talking about, the minimum should really be 20% to prevent these gaps forming. So this is happening all over football, and this is what this project Big Picture represents. Again, it's just this. Even though it's dressed up in altruistic or charitable ways, it really just increases the gearing of football towards a small number of clubs attracting most of the interest and thereby most of the money.
There's one last thing that I just wanted to talk about. There are some really good aspects of this where they're talking about limiting agents' fees and a hard salary cap for the EFL. Like, perhaps a salary cap is one way to get competitive balance back into the local domestic leagues, but ultimately the super clubs won't agree with that until they can have a salary cap that works for them at a European Super League level.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember someone who used to be in the FA explaining exactly that to me last week when we were talking about the pyramid. That the fundamental problem with this is one thing that should be said. Actually, a lot of this actually comes from the fact that football's to use these horrible kind of technocratic language, but this is the way it's talked about. The stakeholder map in football is so fragmented, particularly in England, where there's so many different parties. The Premier League on one side, the Big Six within the Premier League, the FA, the EFL, and there's no unifying leadership to bring it together. And I mean, so even with the FA, the major problem they have is that their jurisdiction is national, but most of their problems, or most of the issues they have to deal with, comes from clubs who have an international jurisdiction, who are truly global clubs, whose kind of sphere of interest goes way beyond anything the FA can deal with. So the example that was put to me was when the story was that a very irate Alan Sugar rang someone who was involved in the FA and said one of the first things that he has to do, you've got to do something about these agents. And Sugar hung up the phone. But you can't do something about these agents when these agents basically, all right, so you can curb them on the English side, but it will just mean, I mean, they're still operating in a global market, and it just hamstrings the English clubs on one side, and creates problems from there. So yeah, it just keeps coming back to that, really.
Yeah, as we said, slightly intractable. Miguel, you've done a great job of explaining it to us. Before we go, I don't know what your take is on the whole Ireland COVID scenario. Were they just unfortunate? Is this more FAI bungling? Is it a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything, but I was thinking about it. I mean, I did a piece on Friday about kind of the madness of playing international football at this time. Given, like, I mean, so say, for example, of English football, there's been no clusters yet that has caused Premier League match postponements or anything like that. But if you wanted to design a situation where you could feasibly get clusters, well, it would be to send multiple players over international borders to various different groups and various different bubbles. But the thing about that that is. Like, we saw very early on in this break with like the Scotland situation where Kieran Tierney was suddenly denied them. If we're going to insist on playing football in these circumstances, then you have to accept that there are going to be some suddenly wild deviations or things you didn't expect are going to be denied players just because of the context they're playing in. This is the new reality in that sense, and you're going to have to accept. You almost have to treat COVID cases, even if we have bigger debates about false positives and all this. But you're going to have to treat COVID cases denying players a bit like injuries, because this is the way it's going to be now.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. Miguel, great to talk to you. Thanks a million.
Cheers. Thanks, lads.
It's Miguel Delaney giving us some very interesting thoughts about the project Big Picture.